details at this hour about the gunman in the Florida school massacre coming into us here at America's Newsroom. The family who took in Nikolas Cruz when his adoptive parents died is now speaking out, revealing new details about him in the wake of the shooting that killed 17 people and all the missed signals that went along the way as well. On this President's Day, I'm Bill Hemmer, live inside of America's Newsroom. Big welcome to Alicia.
Thank you.
From Denver, Colorado.
Absolutely.
Welcome back to New York.
Thank you so much. And I am Alicia Acuna, in for Sandra Smith. The family telling ABC's Good Morning America that they never saw this side of him, despite the fact that so many others did.
Everything everybody seems to know, we didn't know. We had rules, and he followed every rule to the T.
Still can't process it, what he's done, because this wasn't the person that we knew. Not at all. And if we had known any of the things that we're hearing, we're learning a lot about all of this just the same as everybody else, you know, and we feel betrayed as well and just shocked.
Meanwhile, the White House planning a listening session later this week as Florida high school students rally over the weekend calling for action.
Also, President Trump on Twitter over the weekend slamming the FBI, saying this: very sad, the FBI missed all the many signals sent out by the Florida school shooter. This is not acceptable. They are spending too much time trying to prove Russian collusion with the Trump campaign. There is no collusion. Get back to the basics and make us all proud. More on all that in a moment. But first, Steve Harrigan live in Parkland with more on the details about what we are learning about the shooter. Steve, good morning there.
Bill, you can see the road in front of the school is now back open to traffic. The school itself should be open for teachers by the end of the week. As far as the suspected shooter, 19-year-old Nikolas Cruz, he remains in solitary confinement. The Broward sheriff saying he's also on suicide watch. That means that eyes are always on him. It is likely, according to his public defender, that Cruz will plead guilty to 17 counts of first-degree murder. That would be an attempt to avoid the death penalty. This afternoon, we could get more details from Florida's Department of Children and Families. They're expected to release some documents if ordered to do so by the court. We've already learned that a state social worker visited Cruz at his home after Cruz had cut his arms and posted the video on social media. He also posted that he wanted a gun. The state social worker determined that Cruz was low risk of harming himself or others. Another missed red flag in this case, Bill.
Some of the victims now, the funerals continue, and over the weekend, some students speaking up and quite vocal. Steve, what was said in their message?
It's been a real mix here as the grief has turned to anger. As you mentioned, we've had a string of funerals. 4 yesterday, 3 today, 2 more tomorrow, and some of that anger is being channeled into politics as a number of students determine that they intend to try to change the gun laws across the country.
Our elected officials need to get together, overcome their political differences, and get some things done because they need to save the future of our country. And the future of our country are those children that are currently dying because politicians refuse to take action and continue to take money from these special interest groups.
There were major anti-gun rallies across the state this weekend, another one tonight, and next month the students have claimed they will lead a national march to Washington for a big anti-gun rally. Bill, back to you.
Thank you. Steve Harrigan back there in Florida today. Steve, thank you on that. Alicia has more now.
Meantime, White House officials saying President Trump supports new efforts to improve federal gun background checks. This after the president met with victims of the Parkland school shooting last Friday. Kevin Cork is live in West Palm Beach, Florida, where the president is spending his holiday. Kevin.
Very busy weekend for the president, obviously, Alicia, and also very interesting to see how the White House is now talking about more ideas in terms of gun control and possible legislation. Let me show you a pair of pictures. These are lawmakers that the White House now says they'd be willing to listen to and maybe even perhaps advance the agenda to do something about background checks. We're talking about Senate Majority Whip John Cornyn of Texas and Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut. The two men obviously doing what they can to create an idea that would enhance background checks, something that we have also heard from the White House on numerous occasions they would certainly consider as they continue to move forward in the conversation. Let me share a bit of what Sarah Sanders had to say this weekend about what the president thinks. She said the president spoke to Senator Cornyn on Friday about the bipartisan bill he and Senator Murphy introduced to improve federal compliance with criminal background check legislation. While discussions are ongoing and revisions are being considered, the president is supportive of efforts to improve the federal background check system, and this is something that has been very important to the White House for quite some time. In fact, you may remember on Friday the president took part in a roundtable with stakeholders, not just community leaders and lawmakers, but also those who live here, who work here, and whose priority, like all of us, is to maintain the safety and security of America's children. That was on Friday. That's a conversation, as you know, that will continue this week. In fact, the president will have a listening tour on Wednesday, and of course, we'll bring you all the details from that. Alicia?
Kevin, yeah, very busy week this week, but also busy week for the weekend for the president. He was pretty active on Twitter. What can you tell us about that?
Oh, boy, was it ever. Let me take you to Twitter and show you just part of what the president was talking about. Everyone knows that the president has sort of had a back and forth with Adam Schiff, the California congressman. Well, he's actually thanking Adam Schiff this morning. Okay, over the weekend he was thanking him. President tweeted this: finally, little Adam Schiff, the leaking monster of no control, is now blaming the Obama administration for Russian meddling in the 2016 election. He's finally right about something. Obama was president, knew of the threat, and did nothing. Bit of a golf clap here at the end. Thank you, Adam. Of course, the president is making a reference to the announced indictments last week of Russian operatives who began to target America's campaign operations and political debate long before he ran for office. Here's his former campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski.
Well, the president has a very important point, and the point is that the previous administration, the Obama administration, under Jim Comey's lack of leadership at the FBI, should have been doing something about this, because if they were informed back in May of 2014, now don't forget, Donald Trump came down that beautiful escalator in June of 2015, so 13 months later. But what we now know, according to the indictments from Rod Rosenstein, was that for 13 months prior to Donald Trump even getting into the race, the Russians were trying to do something to materially change the outcome of our election.
Materially change the outcome of our election, and they warn, Alicia, this is something that will likely continue as we look forward to the 2018 midterms. Back to you.
Kevin Cork in Florida. Thanks, Kevin.
So for more on this now, I want to bring in Byron York, chief political correspondent, Washington Examiner, Fox News contributor. Byron, good day to you on this
Good morning, Bill.
President's Day. Some on the left think this Russia revelation is bad as Pearl Harbor. You've had 3 days to think about it. What do you think the indictment tells us, Byron?
It is not as bad as Pearl Harbor. I think we can start with that right now. You know, one of the things that the president has tweeted about continually during the whole Trump-Russia investigation is that he says there was no collusion between his campaign and the Russians. And one thing about this indictment we should say is it does not allege any collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians. Doesn't address it, doesn't allege it. It's not there. But I think what's really extraordinary about this indictment, if you look at the indictment in conjunction with earlier testimony that we've had from executives at Facebook and other social media companies, is that the whole operation was fairly small. The Mueller indictment is fairly vague on how much money the Russians spent on this content farm in St. Petersburg that created all these phony Facebook accounts to try to stir discord in the United States. But it wasn't very much, maybe $1 million a year, a month.
I've got 1.2 million. That's compared to 2.4 billion.
Take that figure
Wow.
and compare it to a campaign in which $2.4 billion were spent. Just not a big deal. And if you go back to the testimony that we had back in November, the Senate Intelligence Committee chairman revealed how much the Russians had spent in a few key states on Facebook ads. In Pennsylvania, they spent $300. In Michigan, they spent $823. These are nothing. This is not the stuff of rigging the election. So on the one hand, this is something that the United States government needs to stop the Russians from doing, certainly make sure they don't get any better at it. But on the other hand, it's not something that should cause enormous alarm that the United States is under attack like in Pearl Harbor or 9/11.
44% spent pre-election, 56% post-election. I don't know what that means, but we're going to go through it over time. Quickly, I want to bring out some breaking news from the White House here. The president spoke with John Cornyn on Friday about gun legislation. The White House is telling us supportive of efforts to improve federal background check system. And I would imagine in 2 days' time when we have this meeting at the White House, you're going to hear more of that. What do you make of the continued failed alerts that were given by so many?
Yeah.
I mean, we know of 2 at the FBI right now. The sheriff says 20 times they were called to the house. The school kicked him out. When you get that many warnings and no action is taken or no action can be taken, Byron, what are we left to think about this?
You know, this is one of the most across-the-board failures I think we've ever seen. After incidents like this in the past, we've had this kind of depressing argument with Republicans saying that attention needs to be paid on mental health, and Democrats saying more needs to be paid to gun control. And this is a situation in which there was a failure all across the board. Clearly, the authorities, the local health authorities, the FBI, the police, the school, everybody knew that Nicholas Cruz was a dangerous young man. And so there clearly needed to be not just an intervention on mental health grounds, but an intervention to make sure he could never purchase a weapon. And so this is the kind of thing that actually could bring some of these arguments together. It would probably be very smart for the president to seriously consider some of these arguments that are being made now.
I found Friday afternoon stunning. You had a span of 28 minutes where you had two major news stories from the Department of Justice, and one trumped the other. Last comment on that, Byron.
No, you're absolutely right. The failure in the FBI in terms of acting on this tip beforehand, and it's one of these things. Do I have to draw you a picture? Well, somebody drew them a picture, and they still didn't act on it. So it was. There's been a lot of criticism from Republicans directed at the FBI about the highly politicized investigations it has conducted about Clinton email or Trump Russia, but there's praise at the same time for the way they handled fighting crime. Now, this was just an enormous mistake, an enormous blot on the FBI in terms of the way it fights crime.
Thank you, Byron. Have a good day, okay?
Thank you, Bill.
See you soon. Alicia.
Rush Limbaugh reacting to the Florida shooting.
Prayers and condolences don't solve it, and marches aren't going to solve it. Chris, the next shooter is out there. The next shooter probably has the gun that he's going to use.
Now student survivors are becoming the public face of a new national movement demanding action on gun control. Will their pleas actually lead to policy? Our panel will debate.
Also, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell with a few predictions about the midterms. Can Republicans hold their majorities? Tell you what he said about that coming up.
And Robert Mueller indicts 13 Russian nationals for election meddling, and President Trump is claiming vindication. Is he right? Former Congressman Jason Chaffetz is on deck, but first, here's Senator James Lankford.
Russia's clearly tried to advance their agenda into the United States. The president's been very adamant to say he didn't collude. He's very frustrated that people seem to accuse the fact that the only reason he's president.
New dashcam video showing a high-speed chase in Ohio. The stolen SUV weaving in and out of traffic, skidding across the street, eventually making a hard left, hitting the guardrail and flipping over. The 4 people inside the car are okay, and luckily no one else was hurt. Police say the 16-year-old driver didn't have a license.
There's no allegation in this indictment that any American was a knowing participant in this illegal activity. The indictment alleges that the Russian conspirators want to promote discord in the United States and undermine public confidence in democracy. We must not allow them to succeed.
So then what happens next? Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein announcing a new bombshell indictment of the Mueller matter, the Russia matter, charging 13 with an elaborate scheme to interfere with the election of 2016. So where do we go now? Former Utah Congressman Jason Chaffetz, Fox News contributor. How you doing, sir? And good morning to you.
Good morning. Good morning.
In the words of John Belushi, it's not over till Bob Mueller says it is, right? So what are we waiting on?
Until Mr. Mueller takes a big bow and you see him at the camera, yeah, this thing is not over. Remember, there are still 4 other investigations going on. You have the Senate that's doing its investigation, House Judiciary and Oversight Committee, Gowdy and Radcliffe leading an investigation. The Inspector General investigation, that is a critical component of what's going on. And then you have the House Intelligence Committee looking now at the State Department as well as the intelligence community.
All right, I mentioned this with Byron a few moments ago. 44% of the meddling took place pre-election. 56% took place post-election. What's that tell you?
Well, first of all, we knew about this back in 2014, evidently, so it does beg the question. The Wall Street Journal points this out in their editorial today. What about Brennan? What about Clapper? What did they know? What did Homeland Security know? And why didn't they do anything about it? Why is it more than a year after the election that this is finally being illuminated? And look, clearly the Russians wanted discord throughout the United States. And people like Devin Nunes for years have been talking about this. So Russia's no fan of the United States of America. We better get used to it because they're going to do it again.
Yeah, let me come back to that point. Rush Limbaugh with Chris Wallace on Sunday has a very different theory than most. Watch.
This is all politics, and it's, Chris, it hasn't changed from the get-go. It is about protecting Hillary and Obama. Obama is the primary person being protected here because all of this spying and all of this collusion to destroy Trump happened with his knowledge and probably encouragement.
All right.
And the reason Hillary isn't charged is because that would mean Obama would have to be exposed as participating.
What do you think of his theory there, Jason?
I don't know that we've seen anything directly implicating President Obama, but there are a lot of questions about unmasking that was done, how this dossier was used, how the DNC and the Democratic National Committee and the Clinton Foundation, Mark Elias, who's the attorney who sits in the middle of this web, how all of that was, there's millions and millions of dollars that are flowing overseas, and then it's making its way back into the Department of Justice, being used in our legal system. That's why there has to be all this uncovering, but you see the Department of Justice, State Department, and the Intelligence Committee throwing a stiff arm to congressional investigators. That begs the question, why are they withholding all this information?
Okay,
because it is embarrassing to them and it exposes something.
You mentioned Clapper and Brennan. President Obama was mentioned there as well. What the former president has said is that he did not want to look like he was interfering or tipping the scales on the election. What do you think of that now?
Well, because they all assumed that Hillary Clinton was going to be the next president of the United States. That was always their game plan, and every poll that was out there said that that was going to happen. So as long as it was going in Hillary Clinton's direction, of course they weren't going to, get too involved. It was President Obama who said, hey, even if you wanted to manipulate the election, you couldn't. But were there people spying on Trump campaign officials? I mean, the evidence starts to mount the other direction that, yes, President Trump was actually right.
It runs deep. Jason Chaffetz, thank you for your time. Good to have you back on this Monday morning.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Fox News alert on an ISIS ambush attack near Baghdad. At least 27 people are dead. The details on how this all unfolded, plus this.
Ooh, this was not in a bar. It was brawling on the high seas. Why some passengers say this was the cruise from hell.
Yeah, nice vacation. And this, what forced this plane to land in the middle of a busy highway? We'll explain after the break.
So at least he stuck the landing. A small plane putting down the middle of a Northern California freeway. The pilot reported engine trouble before landing on the median. That's pretty good. He says he tried to glide the plane to a nearby airport, quickly realized he would not make it. My guess is there's a fuel issue going on there. Luckily, no one was injured. That from Northern California.
A deadly attack on Iraqi-backed troops, and ISIS is claiming responsibility 2 months after they were supposed to have been defeated. Benjamin Hall is live in London. Benjamin?
Yeah, hi Alicia. This is just a reminder that although ISIS have been defeated as a territorial force in Iraq and Syria, they still have pockets of resistance. They still have sleeper cells. They are still armed and they're still very dangerous. Sunday's attack comes just 2 months, as you say, after Baghdad declared victory against the terror group, yet they continue to carry them out successfully. On Sunday, they were disguised in army uniforms. They'd set up a fake checkpoint, and they attacked as Shia militias were actually hunting for ISIS remnants. The clashes lasted for at least 2 hours into the night, just southwest of the city of Kirkuk. 27 Iraqi militiamen were killed, along with a number of the terrorists, though others were able to escape. Now, what's also very telling here is that it was Shia militias who were leading the hunt against ISIS remnants in this part of Iraq. The forces who were attacked often answered to Iran. They're the Badr Brigade, and this has long been a point of contention for the U.S. government, who is really concerned with increased Iranian influence in Iraq. And then as another reminder of how ISIS ideology remains, in Russia, ISIS claimed responsibility for an attack there when a man walked into a church on Sunday and opened fire on worshippers, killing at least 5, injuring numerous others. That area of Russia in Dagestan has long been a hotbed of Islamic radicalism, and the gunman there shouted Allahu Akbar before he opened fire. So certainly great strides forward in the battle against ISIS and somewhat the ideology, but they continue to launch attacks in Libya, in Egypt, in Pakistan, Iraq, Syria, as far afield as the Philippines. So you might say this is evidence, though, while many battles have been won, the war continues. Alicia?
That's true. Benjamin Hall in London.
Surviving students, meanwhile, from the Florida massacre, rallying for change over the weekend.
At the end of the day, this isn't about the red and blue, the GOP and the Democrats. This is about adults and kids. And at this point, you're either with us or against us.
Well, where will those passionate pleas lead next? We'll have a closer look coming up on that. Coming up.
Plus, chaos at the Daytona 500 as NASCAR kicks off its 2018 season.
Patrick, Casey Kane.
The surviving students from last week's school massacre rallied together over the weekend, emerging as passionate voices in the debate over gun control, demanding legislation to become policy.
This is a student-led grassroots movement, and this is not a debate, this is a discussion between Americans, because we've had too many debates before, and we've gotten nowhere.
This is a case of simple, please stop. Please stop allowing us to be gunned down in our hallways. People are telling us that we should run for president. We want an education.
Lawrence Jones is editor-in-chief of Campus Reform and Democratic strategist Michael Starr Hopkins, contributor for The Hill. Thank you so much for joining us. These students are not just kids, they are survivors who look to be becoming activists out of something they experienced firsthand. They have the passion, the agony of watching their friends and others die in front of them, and now rage, pushing them to call for a change in our gun laws. How feasible is this, their demands? And Lawrence, let's begin with you.
Well, you know, I'm heartbroken for what happened to those kids. I'm also very intrigued that these students are getting involved in the political process because they do have a right to have a voice. But I'm worried that this is getting ready to turn into the typical political debate. And I know that's not their intentions, but this is becoming the same thing about pro-gun, anti-gun. And although I get their desperation, in reality, Republicans and Democrats, they don't know what to do. No one knows what to do. And I feel like this is taking another political stance.
Michael, what are your thoughts on this? Do you think they're actually going to be able to get something done, that these kids could actually push Congress to move?
I think they will be, and first I just want to start and say God bless these kids, because they've managed to take something that's a horrible tragedy and turn it into a real teachable moment. And what they're doing is saying that there's a lobby for gun owners, but there's no lobby for kids that are victims of these horrible crimes. And we've gotten to a point now where you can't go to school, you can't go to church, you can't go to a concert, you can't go to basic places without being worried about whether you're going to be shot. You know, I went to the movies this weekend and saw Black Panther, and the first thing I did when I got in that theater was check to see where the nearest exit was. Right. That's not the American way. And so I think that we, whether you're Republican or Democrat, we can have a conversation about how we can make sure that people who have mental issues aren't getting their hands on high-powered weapons.
Now, before we get to the next... go ahead.
Yeah, but there's such an emphasis on the tools of these mass killers, but there's not a conversation about the killers themselves and all the evidence that we miss with these people. I mean, this is not the first killer that the FBI has missed crucial evidence that could have prevented this from happening. And I think that should be the focus right now. I get it. There's going to be a debate about guns against and people that want gun control. But we have to take the things that we can actually affect right now. I don't see gun control happening anytime soon.
I have a common sense suggestion.
We can follow on our leads that when we know people are troubled and they have literally said they plan on killing people.
Right. Michael, he brings up a good point here, don't you think? Absolutely. That so much was missed. Every possible thing that could fall through any possible crack went down that crack when it came down to this shooting. Is this really about changing legislation?
Absolutely. I think one of the first things we can do is allow the CDC to look into the correlation between gun crimes and mental health. For over 20 years, the CDC has been restricted from funding any type of research that would do that. You know, there used to be a time where we didn't have school shootings at such a rampant rate. And now, since Columbine, over the last 20 years, it's become a regular occurrence. And there has to be a reason. And it's not just the guns, I agree. There's a societal issue going on, and we need to address that. And I think that, you know, if we allow the CDC to research, we can do that.
Okay, well, picking up on that, Lawrence, if you just give me 1 second here. Columbine was the very first school shooting I ever covered. I'm from Colorado.
Absolutely.
And I want to bring up this point that Rush Limbaugh made on Fox News Sunday with Chris Wallace this weekend about the country running to change laws. Listen.
The next shooter is out there. The next shooter probably has the gun that he's going to use. The next shooter is known by many people in his community who are concerned that this guy may do what everybody's afraid he's going to do. Now, how is anything that we're talking about going to stop that? We have got to realize this is what our country has become. We can wish that it weren't this way, and we can wish that Congress could legislate it away, but they can't.
Michael, back to you again. His point is it's the people, the system. Do you see his point there?
I hear his point, but I think he's wrong. You know, after 9/11, when I was a kid, you used to be able to walk to the gate at the airport. And then after 9/11, you had security checkpoints. Then after Richard Reed, you had to take your shoes off before you went to the airport. We can have gun rights while also acknowledging that these kids have a right to live, to go to graduations, to get married and have kids. We can have a balance between those rights and making sure that, you know, everyone gets the chance to live an American dream.
Lawrence, do you have a word on this?
I think Rush is completely right. You know, if you take the guns away, they'll find knives, bombs, cars. I have made the decision, me and my family, is how can we protect ourselves when these crazy people decide to go in your movie theater. In Texas, I can carry my gun in the movie theater. When I go to college, I can carry my gun on the college campus. But what can we do as Americans to protect ourselves from these killers? Because guess what? It's not going to stop. If you take something away from them, they'll find something else because they are cold-blooded killers. How can we stop them?
Living in fear isn't living. And so if we have to take guns to school, if we have to take guns to movie theaters...
That's the reality, though, Michael. That's the reality.
That may be our reality now, but we need to figure out a way to do better because that's not how we should be living.
Well, one point to both of you. These students will eventually be registered voters, and they are calling on fellow teens across the nation to take action. They are watching, perhaps closer than ever before, to what members of Congress are doing. Lawrence, do Republicans need to be careful here?
Look, I think the messaging needs to be careful. I think all sides need to be careful. But I think it's important, though, that we just don't do something just to be doing something. We have to be intentional. And I don't want to take the rights of legal gun owners away just because we are in this emotional state right now. Everybody's feeling the pain of these kids. Gun owners, the NRA, everyone is feeling this pain.
The NRA is
but we
not
got to be
feeling the pain of
responsible.
this.
They are feeling that pain, Michael. And I think it's insulting to say that the NRA is not feeling
insulted,
the pain. There are people, there are NRA members that kids were affected as well, too. That feel the pain of this country as well.
There are NRA members who
What do you mean it's different?
The NRA is a corporation who has millions of dollars being funneled through it. I don't feel bad for the NRA at all. I think we need to get money out of politics completely. Now, the people who are members of the NRA, I have friends and family that are members of the NRA, and I think that they do feel bad about this. But I think the NRA is a separate group which we need to look at and consider how they're funded.
They advocate for their members, Michael, and it's this type of rhetoric that you're spewing right now on national TV. It's why we won't get change when it comes to this issue. It's because immediately Democrats attack the NRA
gentlemen,
instead of the killer.
Thank you very much. We will continue this, no doubt. Thank you, Lawrence Jones and Michael Starr Hopkins.
Thanks,
Phil.
Good debate there. 22 minutes now before the hour. Pretty good debate here, too. 2018 NASCAR season's underway. Sparks flying in Daytona. A couple of big wrecks. moments, especially near the end, including this one. This is Danica Patrick. About mid-race, she announced prior to the race that this would be her final NASCAR event. In the end, it took overtime. Austin Dillon taking the checkered flag, crossing the finish line, winning the Great American Race in the iconic number 3 car, made famous by Dale Earnhardt, who died 17 years to the day. Cool stuff there. First NASCAR event for me.
First.
I want to tell you, Lisa, it was amazing.
It was. I've never been.
The speed and the power and the precision. I mean, I get it after being down there in Daytona. It was really
pretty exciting. So, very cool.
Yes, indeed. Check it out.
Nice.
Okay? They do this stuff in Colorado too, you know.
They do?
Yeah, somewhere.
I'll have to look. I don't know. I see ski slopes, but I don't know.
Well, there's a lot of that too this time of year. In a moment here, called a Family Feud, and for good reason. A fight on a cruise ship. That and more video of the chaos.
Oh my
It was in the middle of that bad boy. Coming up in a moment here.
Plus, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell predicting the midterms, what he had to say next as Governor John Sununu joins us live with his take.